I love business. I love my Apple computer, a laptop on which I'm talking. I love my car. I love restaurants. I love the private sector in its place. And its place is the marketplace and out of the public space, out of government.
Today, we are going to talk about the notion of critical thinking and the importance of critical thinking and approaching the current situation in the world, namely climate change, COVID situation, and many other things that are happening right now. We are honored that Henry Mintzberg accepted to have this interview with us for the class. As you should know, if you don't, go and check it. He's a professor of management and one of the biggest management thinkers, and a long time writer and educator, and he's currently in McGill University. And we are going to chat with him about his ideas around critical thinking and his approach around the current situation in the world. Thank you very much, Henry, for joining us.
Okay, Annie. Hi. Hello to everybody.
So I'm going to start with the notion of puzzling puzzle. You have a blog about it and you talk about it. Can you tell us a little bit what is a puzzling puzzle?
Yeah. We were in Toronto with some family a few years ago, and they were playing one of these games, sort of like Boggle or one of these word games. There are all sorts of games, and somebody said to me, "Oh, you're going to love this one, Henry." And I said, "No, I'm not. I hate these games. I'm not good at them, and I don't like to do them." And that's what things like Scrabble and all that. And people, I function with words. My work is words. That's what I do. I write words. And yet, I really hate that. And I was kind of wondering, like, why do I resist it so much? And then they had a jigsaw puzzle on the table near where we were playing the game, where they were playing the game. And they were putting together the pieces, and it hit me right then. A jigsaw puzzle, or these games, are what I call pat puzzles. They're not really puzzles, because the definition of a puzzle in the dictionary is something that's mysterious and you can't figure out and so on. Well, these are very pat. When you have a jigsaw puzzle, you have a box. It shows the picture you're trying to make. It's got all the pieces inside. You know that the pieces all fit together perfectly, although you have to figure out which ones go where. And gradually you put the pieces together and you make the image. And too much of what we do today is exactly like that. They're pat puzzles. They're not puzzling puzzles. In other words, it's all very straightforward. When a doctor takes out your appendix, unless something goes wrong, it's pretty straightforward. It's hard. It's complicated. It's difficult. And you need to be trained to do it. But there's nothing puzzling about taking out an appendix, as I say, unless something goes wrong. And I was thinking about the work I do on Rebalancing Society, the fact that the world is completely out of balance, and we'll come back to why and so on. And it occurred to me that I'm dealing with puzzling puzzles. I'm dealing with puzzles where we don't have a box that shows the image. We don't know what the end point is going to be. We have no idea what it's going to look like. We don't know what the pieces are. We have to find them, or more likely create them. And they're not going to fit together perfectly. So it's the antithesis of a puzzle. I call that a puzzling puzzle. And somehow we've got, and that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to work on in terms of the world and so many countries that are totally out of balance today. We've got to figure out what it is. It's puzzling. It's not, and that's why I kind of reject or recoil at playing these games, because it's all so fixed. And it's just, like Boggle how many different ways can you put together these letters? That's fine, but it's not for me. I just, I have an aversion to them.
So basically, these normal games are, the solution is obvious. You need to just get your strategy to arrive there. But in puzzle, you don't even have the final picture. You need to assemble it yourself.
You don't have, and you don't know what you're assembling. You don't have the parts. And when you have to create the parts, or maybe find some and create others, and you don't know how they're going to fit together. And when I did my website, first I did my book called Rebalancing Society, and then I did a website called rebalancingsociety.org. And in fact, I realized, because it was a few years ago I did this blog on puzzling, I realized that's exactly what I was doing in that website. I was pulling together all these pieces that I had kind of created or found and trying to figure out how they can fit together.
That actually brings me to my next question: how we can approach these puzzles, because usually they are super difficult and people avoid to engage with these kind of problems, which are very important. How we can practically engage with these puzzles?
Well, climate change is a puzzling puzzle, although it's not so hard to know what the components are. To say that the use of carbon energy, or stopping or limiting the use of carbon energy, is one component, one piece of the puzzle, is fine. But the harder part about climate change is not what we need to do to stop the warming. It's what we need to do to stop the social system and the political structures that are getting in the way. And that's a puzzle. That's puzzling because, so we know that the big oil companies, or some of them, have been resisting this very vehemently in the case of Exxon at certain points in time. And so how do we stop this? Well, you can go to the U.S. Congress and start by saying that the Supreme Court of the United States legalized bribery. They allowed people to give donations as much as they like. And so all these companies are buying off the U.S. Congress, the senators and a lot of the congressmen. And so how do you stop that? And so that's all part of the puzzle. How do you stop that?
So basically we need to take each piece at a time and try to find our way and try to put this picture together.
You're going to have to repeat because you're cutting out.
I'm saying that basically we find each piece at a time and we try to actually assemble them together to advance one step at a time.
I've been doing blogs for many years now. I don't know 6 years or something. I can't remember, and maybe more. And I've done hundreds of them, and a lot of them are about rebalancing society, and a lot of them are about things we can do. For example, I'm not a big fan of marches. I think marching is fine, and it's a way of expressing your anger and your concern about something. But I think we have to get clever about targeting specific behaviors. So we don't occupy Wall Street. What's Wall Street? Wall Street's not a problem. It's a street. The buildings aren't the problem. The pavement isn't the problem. The sidewalk isn't the problem. It's the behaviors behind the closed doors that's the problem. So what's the point of occupying Wall Street? What we should be doing is targeting specific behaviors. If an oil company is doing something that's unacceptable, start getting clever and targeting things they're doing. Humiliate them or pressure them or whatever it is. We're not being clever. Marching is not clever. It's the easiest thing to do. I mean, you have to get organized and all that, but it's not nothing clever about marching. So we need to get clever, and we're not. So these things just keep going. So a lot of my blogs are about different things that we could be doing, and there's a table in the Rebalancing Society website that allows people who want to say, what can I do? And I know you want to ask about that later. They can go there and click on something and say, all right, here's what I could do. Here's some ideas.
That's true. Thank you. to the second part, basically to approach these puzzling puzzles, we need to go like out of the mainstream thinking, but which we call it critical thinking. You always refer to that. How we can do that, and why society rejecting that type of basically out of the mainstream thinking. How we can approach that issue.
Yeah, I'm amazed at how people, even people who want to do and change things and rethink things, how little creative thinking there is, and how much conformist thinking. As I say, marching is an example. So it's good; it expresses things, but it doesn't get you very far. And you know, my favorite example, and it comes, I think, from a book by Saul Alinsky, who was a very clever community organizer and activist. And he tells this story of the people in San Antonio, Texas, who were fed up with their phone company. And they wanted to pressure the phone company to respond to their concerns. And so everybody paid their bill plus 1 cent. If your bill was $50, you paid $50.01. And it drove the company crazy because they had to show 1 cent credit for all their customers. And so they responded. That's clever. It doesn't take genius. It doesn't take genius. It doesn't take amazing creativity. We're not talking about writing Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, which is an amazing piece of creativity. We're talking about just a little switch. I think a lot of things that change the world are just a little slight switch. I'll give you an example. IKEA. IKEA is famous for selling its furniture unassembled. It saves them money, it saves us money, and we take it home in our car and then we assemble it. So it's a kind of clever strategy. Now, how did this clever strategy come to be? Well, it was because a worker tried to get a table in his car and it didn't fit, so he took the legs off. And then came the strategic moment, which is, wait a minute, if we have to take the legs off, so do the customers. That's a switch. It's a little switch. Oh, damn, I have to take the legs off. Little switch, wait a minute, if I have to take the legs off, so do our customers. And that was the beginning of IKEA's brilliant strategy. Just a little switch. If you can tell a joke, you can do that. And find me someone who doesn't tell jokes, because most jokes are a little switch. So I heard this joke. I would like to die like my grandfather died, quietly in his sleep. Not like the other people in the car who died yelling and screaming. Okay? So it's a little switch. That's what makes it funny. You think Grandpa's lying in bed, but he's driving the car. Okay? Anybody who can make up a joke like that can make a little switch and therefore change the world. Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, which is brilliant, didn't change the world. But that worker at IKEA changed the furniture world.
That's true.
Okay? So it's not hard. It's not hard. We just have to get slightly clever and stop seeing everything like this.
So sometimes we do that. I know that you were working on the COVID and the causes of COVID spread since the beginning of the pandemic. But even when we get like clever, sometimes the society actually pushes back. Can you tell us a little bit about that work and how we can navigate that situation?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 blogs, on my blog, Mintzberg.org/blog. There's 2 blogs there. You can search for them that have the word anomaly. Not anomaly. What's the word? Yeah, anomalies, I think. Is it anomalies? I can't remember. The first one, I described a whole bunch of anomalies, why people are getting it in some places and not other places, and so on and so forth. And then I came across a study in Italy where they found that the particles, the aerosol little particles of COVID might be able to So I tried to write about that. And later I discovered that the ultraviolet rays of the sun deactivate the virus. So if you're living in a polluted city, the pollution blocks the ultraviolet rays and enables the aerosols to live longer. And then I also discovered that people who are susceptible, people who live much of their lives in polluted atmospheres, are more susceptible not only to getting COVID worse, but to getting it in the first place. So there's a third factor with pollution. It could be that by living in polluted air, you're more likely to get ill. And even if the number of particles that you breathe in is not enough to make ordinary people sick, it might make susceptible people sick. And they, in turn, could get lots of people sick by spreading it close by. So they pick it up from long distance in very small, low density doses. They get sick. Anyway, I tried to convey that. I couldn't get it published anywhere. I tried every major newspaper. I tried everything. And now, just the last few days, just happen to have it here. No, it's not here. But an article just came out last Friday, that basically confirms all that by saying that they're finding that with the forest fires out west, they're carrying the virus around, and they're carrying it to other people. There's even a mention in the article, it was in The Guardian, but based on some research, some proper research that had been done, that you might even be able to get sick in New York from the smoke that's being generated in California. Okay? And so that one, we haven't talked about that, but that one article basically confirmed the whole thing. That's 16 months later. Imagine if we had given some attention to that point 16 months ago and looked at the role of pollution in carrying the virus around. I mean, I'm in touch with a graduate of our program right in the middle of it all at the World Health Organization. And Keisha, she kept telling me, no, Henry, no. Then I was in touch with a famous McGill professor who's a top aerosol guy in the world. No, Henry, it can't happen. Well, I'm sorry, it is happening. And there's evidence that it's happening. But even scientists, I'm not talking about lay people, regular, I'm talking about scientists who are just so narrow in their thinking.
But basically, like, because you said it's easy, it's just a twist, but also it's hard at the same time, because it's hard to convince other people that twist, that different thinking and that different approach can really lead to something different. It's easy and hard at the same time, I would say.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, it's not so hard to come up with some conclusions. It's very hard to convince people who are closed-minded and can't imagine anything but what they know. So there's a famous book by Kuhn about paradigms and about normal science. And he basically said, we work within paradigms, we work within established scientific explanations, and then we puzzle. He used the word puzzle solve, and he meant it like jigsaw puzzle solve. We do little tiny sort of things within that, but we are totally blocked from seeing past it, So Einstein comes along, and people don't want to recognize that the Newtonian way of explaining physics is no longer the only valid one. And there's another way of doing things. So we need the most famous scientists are often the narrowest. They just won't accept anything outside their paradigm. And I think that's what's been happening with COVID. And I think it explains why we're not getting much creative thinking with COVID. We've had the same thing over and over again. Mask, distance, all important, all critical, but there's got to be more to it. And nobody wanted to hear anything about anything more to it.
I think it actually been there for like long time, this type of systemic rejection. Your story about Dr. Snow and Chlora took the medical society, I guess, 12 years something to accept him, and to accept the cause of Chlora, despite the fact that that they could prevent many deaths many years earlier. Just
yeah, you're talking about the cholera. Yeah, yeah. You know, he had this idea that it was carried in water, but everybody knew it was carried in air. That was the paradigm, that disease passed in the air, it can't pass in the water. And so he showed that it was passing in the water, and he showed it and he proved it by taking the handle off a pump where people were getting sick, and as soon as they stopped drinking that water, they weren't getting sick anymore. It took 12 years, as you say, until the establishment accepted that it could go through water. It was amazing, absolutely amazing.
So let us transition to the biggest thing I want to talk today with you about Rebalancing Society, because at least my understanding is that the root of all these things that we are talking about is somehow because our societies are not balanced and these forces are not interacting properly to each other. Can you tell us a little bit about that notion of rebalancing society and what that means, and how the current situations can be the manifestation of that not balanced situation?
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning for me. I visited Prague in 1991. That was 2 years after the Velvet Revolution, 2 years after the Berlin Wall fell, and the Czechoslovakia at the time rejected communism and so on. And the West had a very simple explanation for that capitalism had triumphed, that it was a battle, a Cold War between capitalism and capitalism won. And being in Prague and looking around and seeing the situation, talking to people, I said, that's completely wrong. That's not what happened. Communism collapsed under its own dead weight. It was so out of balance. The communist countries were so out of balance in favor of government, the power of government, and markets were weak, and business was weak, and what I eventually called the plural sector, civil society, the sort of associations and communities, that was weak. And so they collapsed because they were out of balance, whereas the Western countries were not capitalist. They certainly had capitalism, strong business sector with strong capitalism. They also had much stronger government at that point, and they had much stronger community associations at that point. So whereas the Eastern European countries were out of balance, the successful countries in the West were balanced across the three sectors, not only public, private, government, business, but also community, the plural sector, because there's so many associations in that sector. So I kind of wrote a piece a year later on that, and then I started collecting material about rebalancing society, and I published the book in 2015, and then I kept working and so on. And basically, the argument in the book is that a healthy society balances governments that are respected and businesses that are responsible and communities that are robust, public, private, plural. And healthy societies balance that, and unhealthy societies don't. But because of that misunderstanding, a lot of the most successful countries in the world, particularly the two leading liberal democracies, America, the United States, and Britain, United Kingdom, both have gone totally out of balance on the side of private sector interests. Not totally, but seriously out of balance on the side of private sector interests. Whereas countries like the Scandinavian countries, New Zealand, Canada, Germany, Japan, maintained much more of a balance than they did. And so because we misunderstood what brought down communism, we're being brought down by the same phenomenon on the other side of the political spectrum. They were brought down by too much power in government, and our democracies are being brought down by too much power on the side of business. I love business. I love my Apple computer, a laptop on which I'm talking. I love my car. I love restaurants. I love the private sector in its place. And its place is the marketplace and out of the public space, out of government. What you have in the United States is private sector organizations totally dominating everything in the country.
So you have a blog that you talk about the direction of this cycle from plural to public and to private, and then you're explaining how right now the circle is going counterclockwise. It should be clockwise. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How this circle should work?
You're kind of, say it again.
You're talking about the circle starts from the communities and plural sector, and they are the ones choosing the government, and then the government regulate the businesses, and then right now it's kind of going in a reverse direction. Yeah. Can you a little bit explain that for us?
Yeah, well, business dominates government in almost every country now. But every capitalist so-called country, in most of them, certainly in the United States, certainly in Britain, less so in Canada, but still very powerful. Look, we give a seat at the table to businesses that we want to develop a plan for climate change. So we give the oil companies a seat at the table to influence. The number of shocking things over and over again, where I was reading about a committee that decides what organic food is, what an organic product is. The big food companies have a seat at the table. They're lobbying for chemicals to be included in organic foods, as acceptable in organic foods. That's crazy. It's crazy. Well, they would say, yeah, but the NGOs are there. But the NGOs aren't there for personal interest. The businesses are there for private interest. So we're doing this all the time, everywhere. And we've got to reverse that cycle. Change begins on the ground, that kind of radical social change. The referendum, when Martin Luther was a monk. He was nobody influential. He was just a monk, but he nailed some 95 criticisms of the church onto the door of a church, of the Catholic Church onto the door of a church. It went viral literally within weeks because they had a new technology called the printing press that could take it viral. And people were so angry at the church that they joined in, and you got the Reformation, okay? Starts on the ground, and then it goes, and then you pressure the government, you pressure business, government legislates to stop the worst behaviors in business, and business itself starts to become responsible because they see that their customers and the population wants them to be responsible, and you drive that change from the ground, whereas now you've got big business and globalization. Globalization has no countervailing power. There's nothing to stop. Globalization is economic globalization, and there's nothing to stop it. It's totally influenced by business, by big business, and no powers that can stand up to it, certainly not the United Nations. One missing part is that when people get sufficiently fed up with the imbalance we have, they start electing community thugs. They start electing people like Trump. What's happening in Hungary, what's happening in Turkey. They're electing quite right-wing or quite narrow interests who throw their countries out of balance on the side of the plural sector. So what you have in Turkey is religious group controlling the country, and now in Afghanistan. What you have in Venezuela, was groups of poor people taking control, and they were resisting the power of business. But of course, they just took the country out of balance in a different way. So when I think of Hungary, And if I'm sitting in Hungary and I say, first we had fascism, okay? We had the Nazi part, the Germans coming in, but Hungary had its share of fascism, and we had that during the war. Then the war went, the Russians came in, then we had communism. So we started with a kind of fascism that was imbalanced on the side of the plural sector. Then we went to communism imbalance on the side of the public sector. Then communism collapsed, and in came the oligarchs, and in came the brilliant American economists who had all the answers for Eastern Europe. And so capitalism was the answer, and that hasn't worked. So if you're a Hungarian and you're sitting there saying, well, wait, we had the power of the plural sector, then we had the power of the public sector, now we have the power of the private sector, what are we supposed to do? Very simple answer: balance. You need all of them in balance. We don't need imbalance in balance. We don't need imbalance in favor of either plural or public or private. We need balance. And if you look at the Scandinavian countries or Canada or New Zealand, what you see are countries that are relatively balanced compared to many others.
So, what role do you see that in this imbalance actually plays in this current COVID situation? How countries actually dealing with the COVID situation? Because I can, like, seeing the numbers, I can see it as if like a balanced countries are dealing with the COVID situation better than imbalanced countries. And how do you view basically this imbalance contributions to the current situation, COVID policy situation?
Well, first of all, the countries that are more balanced, not always, but mainly, have fared much better than the countries that were out of balance. Under Trump, the United States suffered badly. Under Johnson, the Great Britain or the United Kingdom is still suffering badly. Brazil is suffering badly under Bolsonaro. So the countries that don't have balance can't deal with COVID, because what you need, the public sector is supposed to protect us. The private sector is supposed to supply us with masks and ventilators, and the plural sector is supposed to sustain us and in our communities. And so the countries that have done well, like New Zealand, have those three factors in somewhat balance compared to Brazil, United States, Britain, India with Modi, and so on.
Thank you.
But there's another side to this too. I'm writing an article now called "Can the pandemic save the planet?" And what I mean by that is that the main lesson from the pandemic is that when we're faced with a severe enough problem, we're capable of making unbelievable changes. We closed down our whole economies in weeks. Imagine. We can't deal with any of these problems. We can't deal with climate change. And yet the COVID comes along and bang, we close everything down. In weeks, close all the restaurants, all the stores. Amazing. That's the message of COVID, that if we really want to change, we can change. Okay? And so we should be able to deal with climate change. In fact, we could deal with climate change a lot easier than we dealt with COVID. But let's start with pollution. 4 million people have died from COVID. You know how many people die? We've talked about it. 7 million people die every single year from pollution. 7 million every year, 4 million this one time from COVID. Okay?
Yeah.
Pollution is a much more severe problem than COVID. Much more severe. Nobody would sort of dream that, but it's much more severe. So we need to deal with that. We need to deal with climate change, which could kill a lot more people. And we don't need to shut down our economies to deal with climate change. We need to shut down pollution. We need to shut down warming. We need to shut down carbon energy. Well, that's a heck of a lot easier than shutting down the whole economy. So we could do it. We could do it. What do our governments do? They give us 40-year plans, 20, 30, 40, 50-year plans. 4-year governments give us 40-year plans. Just think about that. The government's gone in 4 years. The next government comes. Obama has a nice plan for climate change. Trump comes along and throws it in the garbage. Biden comes along and takes it out of the garbage. Who's next to put it back in the garbage? We don't need plans. Enough plans. We need action. We need action now. What we're doing, tell me what you're doing now. Not next year, not in 40 years. Tell me what you're doing now. And governments are afraid. And yet, look what they did. They closed down the whole damn economy.
It's true. So I'm an individual person. Like, I understand what you are saying, but when I think about it, what can I do possibly as a single person that can move things? Like, how can I act, really? It seems impossible.
Well, if it's impossible, then nobody should vote, because my vote is useless. I have never been arriving in a place where my vote made the difference. That one more vote, had I voted the other way, so why should I vote? Well, of course, we know what the answer is. If all of us take that attitude, we're dead. We wouldn't have democracy. So we all vote. Well, it's the same thing here. Go out and do something. Do something. Recycle something that you were going to throw away. Tell your neighbor to wear a mask. Do something. And if everybody does something, there will be a lot done. Tell a company that's polluting down the street that you're not going to accept it anymore. Okay? That we're going to picket you until you stop that pollution. If everybody did something, it would change very quickly. And so we've got to act. On rebalancingsociety.org, there's a table. One of the pages is called Action, and there's a table, and you can click next to what I can do, what my community can do, what my company can do, what my government can do, and you click on the dots, and there's about 40 different suggestions as to what people could do. There's much more, as I said, because our creativity is not bounded. But there's much more that everybody could be doing, and that could be a starting point. They could just go on the site, look for the action page, click on the box. You can show it. Maybe you can add it into the thing.
Yeah,
and show
I will put that edited in the video. Yeah.
And so there's.
So basically, the thing is, we are social creators, and then the social pressure can move us actually towards a specific actions. So if someone wants to go against a situation, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, because Iran had an outbreak before in Canada, we actually have those outbreaks in March 2019. I was wearing mask and I was like using alcohol and the hand sanitizer, and everybody were like, do you have COVID? Why are you doing that? They were pressuring me of not doing those things. Then later on, that was a mainstream to do. So it's really hard for people, especially at the beginning of each action, like to go against the current situation, how we can deal with that. It's really like people feel pressured. I've heard many people that felt pressure reporting someone who is not obeying quarantine or not wearing mask or whatever. People feel pressured, and they see, let's help each other, let's be friendly together, and let's not do it. We go with the current. How we can overcome that? How we should view these social pressures? When
Westerners used to see, before COVID, when Westerners used to see Japanese and Chinese people wearing masks, which they do commonly, we assumed they were protecting themselves, but they weren't. They were protecting other people because they were stopped. They knew they were ill or had a flu or something, and they were stopping it from passing to other people. And it took us a long time to realize that we are carriers. We don't only protect ourselves, we protect others. Now you've got the irony, particularly in the United States, of people who refuse to get vaccinated, and now they're getting sick. And suddenly they're saying, I should have got vaccinated. Now you're getting other people saying, you know what? You're not vaccinated? Stay away from me. I don't want to see you. I don't want you near me. And when you start doing that, you start changing behaviors, you know? And we have to, what we have in the world today is individualism run rampant. We have individualism out of control, where it's me, myself, and I will do what I like. Don't tell me that I have to get vaccinated. It's not your business. Well, I'm sorry, it is my business. If you want to jump off a bridge and kill yourself, that's your business. If you want to jump off a bridge and land on me on the street below, that's my business. Okay? So I won't let you jump off a bridge if I'm, or people I know are on the street below. You know, if you want to do it yourself, I would like to stop you. I hope you won't do it. But it's different. And if you're not getting yourself vaccinated, that's my business, not your business.
Thank you very much, Henry. I guess that is all my questions. If you have any final remark about the importance actually of this creative thinking, critical thinking, and the role that this approach actually plays in tackling the puzzles that we are facing, like climate change, like COVID, please give us your final.
Yeah, I would just say one thing. This is going mostly to, although it'll get out to others maybe, but going especially to McGill undergraduate students. And McGill has been a hotbed of fantastic activities. And you in the class, 250 of you or so in the different sections, are key to changing things. And you're in a university that has a history of people just like yourself doing all kinds of things. And as I say, it's not complicated. Next time you tell a joke, just think, I could be helping to change the world and not just telling a joke. I could be switching things around and starting movements that could have huge effects, like Greta in Sweden, who got up in the United Nations and said, how dare you? How dare you take away our future? You know?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Henry. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thanks for asking me, Hania.